Hi, everybody. It's Miss O'Connell. I am hoping that you are all doing well. This is take two of this because somehow my screen stopped recording. So I'm going to try this again. So, let you know, we're going to finish up this Vietnam presentation probably by tomorrow, and I will post your quiz sometime this weekend. And it's just a way for you, it'll be much like the civil rights quiz. It's just a way for you to review some stuff and not get stagnant in this time away from the classroom. I will be at your pickup next week, which remember, you don't have to do the social studies assignment because you're doing this. But I really think that you should stop by and say hi because I miss seeing all your beautiful faces. Okay, so 1968 presidential election. We are going to have Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace. So Richard Nixon was the Democratic nominee. If you remember him, he ran against John Kennedy in 1960. Hubert Humphrey is going to be the Democratic nominee, and he kind of slides into this because Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. He was the front runner. And then we have George Wallace from Alabama. If you remember, he was shot in an assassination attempt. So he is confined to a wheelchair. He wouldn't have been the first president to be in a wheelchair. FDR had been, but he is not going to be victorious. So leading up to the election, North Vietnam bombing was halted. And there was a ceasefire that would soon follow. So there's just going to be kind of this stop in war for a period of time. So the winner is going to be Nixon, and this was a big deal for him. He had wanted to be president for a long, long time. The electoral vote, he had 301 votes compared to Humphrey, who had 191, and George Wallace, who had 46. So electorally speaking, it really didn't make a huge difference. But as far as the popular vote went, Nixon had 43%, Humphrey 42%, and Wallace 15%. So this is where it comes into play. Wallace took 15% away from Nixon and Humphrey. So, you put that 15% back in, one of those individuals could have had 50% of the popular vote. And you always kind of want to have more, 50% or more, when going into the presidency, because that means that the majority of Americans are behind you. So Richard Nixon, I love a map. Here it is. He is in red. Humphrey is in blue, and Wallace, as you can see, he carried the deep South states, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. He carried those. Okay, so the war is going to wind down, and when Nixon becomes president, he is going to implement what is known as his plan to end the war, and that was Vietnamization or Vietnamization. And the goal was to gradually withdraw troops out while the South assumed a lot more fighting. So keep American troops there, but withdraw a lot of them to give more power back to the South. So by June 8th of 1969, 25,000 U.S. troops are removed from Vietnam. We also increase airstrikes against North Vietnam and begin secretly bombing Viet Cong sanctuaries in Cambodia to hopefully flush out any supply lines they have or any other, reinforcements they have. This is the issue, though. Back in America, a lot of people had no idea where Cambodia was. So I remember clearly, and I should have put the picture on this PowerPoint, but I didn't. Richard Nixon went on television, and he actually had a big cutout map of Cambodia, and he was pointing out to where this was, right next to Vietnam, because people had no idea why it was so important to kind of bomb this area. So he did that. And then he also is going to appoint Henry Kissinger as his special assistant for national security affairs. And he is going to and Kissinger is a big deal. He had a lot of experience. He was very good at his job. He's also going to practice, excuse me, I have to yawn. He's going to practice linkage. And linkage is this idea that if you link everybody who's involved in the war in one way or another, maybe we can bring about an end to it. So he actually goes to the Soviet Union and China to try to convince them to reduce their aid to North Vietnam so that the South would have a better chance and that they could keep up and hopefully end the war a lot sooner. I'm pretty sure that Henry Kissinger knew that once the U.S. was out of Vietnam, the South didn't stand a chance against the North. But that wasn't his goal. He was trying to make it a little bit easier for them. So the old adage of the enemy of my enemy is my friend with the idea of China and the Soviet Union being the enemy of um, South Vietnam. Okay. Uh, so I don't know. I guess that really doesn't really apply. But we wanted to make nice with the Soviet Union and China. Okay. Because we wanted them to ease up a little bit. So Kissinger, who was on the left there, is going to enter into secret negotiations with the North Vietnam representative, Lee Duc Tho. We know about them now. They were secret at the time, to try to get this war to end. So there were some questionable decisions that came about at this time, and one of those decisions was the My Lai incident. And the My Lai incident occurred in the spring of 1968. And I think a lot of times we brush over some of the not so um, kind occurrences that the U.S. is responsible for. But we're not going to do that here because we want to be open and honest about what's happening. So My Lai was a small Vietnamese, South Vietnamese village, okay? And when U.S. troops arrived, and some of these pictures are hard to see, when the U.S. troops arrived in My Lai under the command of Lieutenant William Calley, they wind up massacring unarmed South Vietnamese civilians in their village. And I'm talking around 500 men, women, and children. And it gets worse from that. 182 were women, 17 of them were pregnant, 173 children, including 56 infants. There were also torture that went on. There was rape that went on. Definitely a big stain on the United States as far as Vietnam was concerned. So why did this even happen? Well, at this time, the morale for the U.S. was really, really down. And they had intelligence, whether it was good intelligence or not, that said that My Lai was a Viet Cong village. So I still don't understand how, even if it was a Viet Cong village, how you rationalize killing women, pregnant women, children. I don't understand that per se. So the consequence, this was actually hidden for a period of time, but it will be unearthed, and William Calley was convicted for his role in the killings, but he wound up getting a reduced sentence by Nixon, and he only had to serve 3 months on house arrest. Okay, and I can't remember if one of these was a video on him. I can't remember. I should have looked at these first. I didn't. But please watch these PBS videos because it's going to give you some good information. So a lot of the people who did the killing, he didn't kill all these people himself. They argue that we were just following orders. What are we to do? If we didn't listen to him, we would have been in trouble. It's the same argument that Nazi officers used during the Holocaust. So it's an interesting thing. You look at war, like you have to fight with the morality of it because you may know something's wrong. You might have to stand up for it. You may get in trouble for it. But it's definitely a difficult situation in a lot of ways. So definitely My Lai is not something that a lot of people broadcast. I actually, when I took a class in college, I read a whole book on My Lai, and I'm just touching the surface of it. Definitely a horrible thing. So other questionable decisions at this time, there's a lot of trouble at home. So when the bombings of Cambodia started, we're also going to have a lot of protests going on in the United States, which were happening already, but we're going to see them amp up at this moment. And one of those protests occurred after American troops invaded Viet Cong bases to destroy them in Cambodia. Kent State, which is a Kent, Ohio, a college in Ohio, they are going to have a protest. And in Kent, 4 students wound up dead at the hands of the National Guard. 2 of those students were just innocent bystanders who just happened to be walking to class and got in the way of bullets. So it was very unfortunate. What you're going to see down here, this video details the Kent State Massacre. These videos on the left, I believe, or on the right, I believe, are songs. One is a song called Ohio, and it was written by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And it talks about the 4 dead in Ohio. We would be listening to that in class. So definitely take a look at that for sure. The result of another protest at Jackson State College in Mississippi, 2 students were dead. So something has to be done. the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is going to be repealed by Congress. And if you remember the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, that had given Nixon, or that had given Johnson powers to send troops out without having to declare war, which was Congress's job. So they took that power away and they wanted to give the power back to Congress. So the Pentagon Papers were also released at this time, and it was leaked by a former member of the Department of Defense. I don't think the Department of Defense wanted the public to get their hands on this, but it contained details about the decisions to expand the war. And it also contained details, the biggest detail that they had was that the government had been lying to the American people about Vietnam, saying one thing but doing another thing. So they had not been truthful. And this is where we really start to see a distrust in government that we will have moving forward. I mean, look at how we view government today versus how we viewed government during the time of, FDR and Lincoln and Truman and, even going back to Washington and Adams and Jefferson. We trusted our government. And now I think there's a lot of untrust that's happening within the U.S. government for sure. Okay, so the United States says we're basically done, okay? The 1972 election, Nixon is going to win again, and he said 4 years, I still haven't ended this, I need to end it. He wanted to concentrate on things in the United States domestic programs. So Henry Kissinger had high hopes that, quote, peace was at hand. However, the peace talks that were happening between the U.S. and the North are going to fall through because the U.S. wanted the North out of the South. And the North said, no, we're not doing that. Okay. So the Christmas bombings occurred from the United States, 11 straight days of bombing of North Vietnamese targets to kind of show you we still have some power here. Negotiations resumed. January 27th of 1973. The war ends for the United States, okay? So the United States gets out of the war in Vietnam, and the conditions were the U.S. would withdraw troops, would not have any U.S. troops there, and both sides would exchange prisoners of war. So the U.S. would get back their prisoners of war, and the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong would get back theirs, okay? So I'm going to stop there for today. Tomorrow we're going to go on and talk about the real end of Vietnam when North Vietnam invades South Vietnam. And then, there's no North Vietnam and South Vietnam today. There's just one Vietnam. So we're going to talk about how that came about. So I hope that everybody is doing well. I hope that you are hanging in there. Come see me at, the distribution of packets next week. I might be only able to wave, but I miss all of you. And we will go from there. Look for this quiz this weekend sometime. Remember, your reading is due Monday. There will be a quiz on that, and then your project is due the following Monday. And then that'll, other than these chapters, we're going to talk about Nixon and Watergate. We'll be wrapping stuff up because tomorrow's May 1st. Unbelievable. But we're still moving forward, okay? Learning doesn't stop just because we're at home. All right. Love you guys. Miss you guys. Talk to you soon.